VikesNow, Dustin Baker. Back when I started the show in March, we went from free agency, the draft, OTAs, mini camp, preseason, regular season, and I didn't know for sure whether or not Minnesota would make the postseason, but we're here. We're here right now. It is wild card weekend. The Vikings have the 3 seed. Bada bing. They're going to take on the New York Giants. I predicted them to go 11-6 this season. They went 13-4, to which we say we'll take it. They had the best season by a first-year Vikings head coach in franchise history. Second place was Dennis Green in 1992, finished 11-5. So props right out of the gate to Kevin O'Connell for changing the culture, winning all these one-score games with an impeccable 11-0 record and games decided by eight or fewer points. What in the world? Where did that come from? We're going to find out this weekend if the Vikings are supremely battle-tested with all of those close games, or if they will conform to the national narrative as fraudulent. They finished the season 27th in team DVOA, which makes them the 6th worst team in football according to the numbers, the analytics, the metrics. So we'll see what gives this weekend and hopefully beyond. But I want to go at a high level, the Vikings being in the postseason, chat about some items. But first, hats off to Kevin O'Connell for last week. I was very skeptical about playing starters in general at Chicago because I really didn't buy into the, get in a groove. I was like, who cares? They've already won 12 games. They've got it in their DNA to win close games. Let's not risk injuries to the titans of industry like Christian Darrisaw, Kirk Cousins, Danielle Hunter, Justin Jefferson. I don't want any type of that. For the most part, they escaped unscathed. I think Dalvin Cook and Shannon Sullivan were temporarily banged up, but nothing long-term. So O'Connell's plan worked. They won the game, which is why we do podcasts and shows like this, and they play the sport. They escaped mostly healthy. They had an outside chance at the 2 seed at the time, which was the goal probably of playing starters in general. They finished the season on a high note. You didn't have to limp into the postseason just getting your asses thoroughly beat by the Packers. The patchwork offensive line, now minus Brian O'Neill, probably, maybe Garrett Bradbury, it got some work in, and it looked pretty damn good against a very shitty Bears pass rush. And then you allowed the starters to erase those ill feelings against the Packers while, in the second half, giving a lot of the rookies some run. And those are dudes who are competing for the 2023 team. It was really just a preseason game. When it was all said and done, it was like how we used to do the third preseason game of the year. That was the Bears game. And I was there. Tickets were dirt cheap, so I got to sit in the second row. It was quite the experience. But hats off to O'Connell. His plan worked. Mine was all for nil, but that's why he coaches the Vikings, and I sit here at the kitchen table chatting about them. All right, so the first thing I want to get to, there's a very interesting aspect about playoff weekend, of course, including the Vikings, and that is we will all be Saturday scoreboard watching. What the hell does that mean? Well, the San Francisco 49ers have the 2 seed, thanks to the Vikings turd at Lambeau Field 2 weeks ago. So they need to lose. And there after that, if the Vikings can beat the Giants, then 2 playoff games would transpire at US Bank Stadium. For now, it's only 1 guaranteed, but the Seahawks snuck in the dance thanks to the Detroit Lions. I'm going to touch on them for a minute later, bless their heart. And so now, Pete Carroll's Seahawks, and Pete Carroll has a marvelous career record as coach of the Seahawks against various iterations of the 49ers. He's 18-9. As the Seahawks coach against Harbaugh and Shanahan and Mike Nolan, maybe Singletary, all those dudes. So he knows how to beat the 49ers and the good versions. Now this year, the Seahawks have lost twice to the 49ers, but who hasn't, aside from the Bears and that slop fest in week 1. But you want, emphatically, you remember how you cheered for the Lions Sunday night? Keep that same juice, energy, momentum for the Seahawks because the first playoff game on the docket is Seahawks and 49ers. If the Seahawks pull a rabbit out of the hat, that means you will know, watching the Vikings game against the Giants, whether or not they're playing for a home divisional game in round 2. If the San Francisco 49ers win, which everybody expects them to do, then the Vikings will hit the road to San Francisco. But the very first tantalizing part of Wild Card Weekend is, indeed, you want the Seahawks to win. You want 2 home playoff games, whether you're going like me or you just want the home field advantage, which is, what we all want. But yeah, you have that possibility. And thankfully, the Seahawks aren't a complete pushover. They would be the first, I think they'd be the first 7 seed to win a game in the postseason. So why not now? Why not aid the Vikings? On the whole, this is the first Vikings home playoff game since 2017. You might remember that game. It was the Minneapolis Miracle. They've only hosted 1 playoff game in that building since its erection in 2016. And for the home field advantage that the Vikings have, I believe, I tweeted this last week, I think it was 4th best home field advantage in the NFL since that building opened. They should have more home playoff games, but they got bogged down in mediocrity in the waning Zimmer years, but they're back. On the whole, the Vikings are 7-7 in the wild card round. I tweeted that a couple days ago, which is funny because Kirk Cousins will be the quarterback, and most people associate him with mediocrity. Well, the Vikings can climb to 8-7 if they beat the Giants in wild card round history. And then strangely, you'll probably know that when the Vikings are good, they're good and they win the division, they get a first-round bye. You'll think of 2009 or even back to 1998. But curiously, they haven't won a home wild card game since 1999 when they effectively kind of ended the tail end of the Cowboys run. So 1999 was the final time the Vikings have won a home playoff game. Since then, let's see, they lost in 2008 to Tarvaris Jackson, with him against the Eagles in a lifeless playoff effort. I remember it well. I did not like it. And then 2015, of course, today is the 7-year anniversary of Blair Walsh missing the kick. That was the other wild card home loss. So they can rectify sins and make it, my goodness, 23 years in the making since they've won a wild card game at home. I want to get this out there. This one's big, and I think it's self-evident, but I want to state the case for it. This is a ginormous game for Kirk Cousins. Now, we've already seen it in him that he can win in the wild card round. He did it magnificently against the Saints in 2019 on the road, 7-point underdogs, walk-off fashion, Kyle Rudolph, game over in overtime. So this game is a large litmus test for Cousins because here's the deal. He's kind of received the benefit of the doubt, even from naysayers to a degree, because all they've asked of him since getting to Minnesota is, win the big game. When you're down in the fourth quarter, we want somebody that can drag us back. Well, that's exactly what he's done, to the tune of tying the NFL record for most fourth quarter comebacks. But this is a large game because, let's say, in theory, God forbid, if they come out and play like they did against the Colts in the first half or lose in general prematurely, my goodness, the narrative about Mr. Cousins is going to start like it never left off. And we'll spend at least 2 months of the offseason figuring out, all right, are they going to keep this guy? Should Kwesi trade him? Where will he want to be traded because he has a no-trade clause? Or we'll envision life after Cousins. If you tunnel your way to a 13-4 record, largely thanks to the quarterback, but then you can't win a home playoff game, ay caramba, that will be severely problematic, and I don't look forward to the firestorm if indeed the Vikings lose. So for Cousins' legacy as a Viking, yes, he's already beat the Saints on the road. That was almost like playing with house money because nobody expected them to win on the road at the mighty Saints that year. Now they're 3-point favorites. You don't want to end a 13-win season with some shitty loss at home to these upstart Giants who aren't even that good in the first place. So for Cousins' legacy, especially with the Vikings, this game is just colossal. They've got to win for, your warm fuzzies going forward about him as the quarterback of the Vikings. And plus, he's going to be 35 years old next year. We're going to talk about that all offseason, that even the most ardent Cousins supporters can start to say, if they draft a quarterback, I ain't going to be mad because the guy's getting old. He could conceivably hit a wall next year like Roethlisberger or Breeze in years past, where you're like, this guy ain't it anymore, and you'd want a contingency plan there. So, big game for Cousins and the Vikings, of course, in general. Another interesting aspect, this is 2 first-year head coaches going head-to-head in Kevin O'Connell and Brian Dable. And this is important for the broad implication of the NFL and football, because this is two guys who turned around programs in a single year and got to the postseason. Boom, they're playing each other. And this will be used as an example by various general managers, because here's the deal. General managers who have a little bit of longevity, longer than 2 or 3 years, they think that their work on paper is good. This roster I've built, damn it, is good. These draft picks I get, they're pretty good guys. Why can't this coach win? You're looking at Mike Zimmer. Why couldn't he make this team tick? Why did they collapse in the final 2 minutes of games? On the other hand, the Giants, they got some talent there. I don't know if anybody foresaw them going to the postseason right away, but general managers want to believe that the rosters that they've formulated are good. And so they're going to use O'Connell and Dable as an example going forward that, look what the Vikings did. They won 13 games. There's somebody out there that can make my roster achieve wins, and the same goes for the Giants. So it's a big moment for two first-year head coaches, and something's got to give. Now, on the Giants, I said that they're not incredibly scary. I think the only really scary thing about them, and they strangely don't use Saquon Barkley like they should all the time, it is their acumen or philosophy to blitz. We saw it no less than 3 weeks ago against the Vikings in this very stadium, US Bank Stadium. Wink Martindale, one of his MOs is sending the house, especially in big moments in games. And, checks notes. The Vikings do have this makeshift offensive line because Brian O'Neill is out for the year and possibly Bradbury going to miss this wildcard game. That's the only thing that's going to keep me up at night as I analyze the game from the rest of the week, is that this defense loves to send the heat. And I don't know if the Vikings have enough oomph to stand up against it. And they probably already identified this last week when they figured out they're probably going to play the Vikings. They're going to be able to get through the little crevices of the Vikings offensive line, and it could be problematic for Cousins. The good thing I always say about Cousins at times like these when we're talking about offensive line peril is he's done this. So the last 5 years, he knows all about this. So, he doesn't have perfect pocket presence, but he's been here before. He knows what it's like to have a poor pass-protecting offensive line, so it'll be nothing new for him. It just would have been nice if the vibes that we had from a pretty good offensive line, better than we're used to in the last 8 years, really got out of the gate with Darisaw coming to power and then O'Neill being a steady Eddie per usual. So that's the only thing I'm really nervous about at all in this game. Well, I guess it's the way that the Vikings have shown they have those awful games. Who knows when they're going to show up again? That, A, is a concern, and then B, the Giants' propensity to blitz. Here's my theory. I think I tossed this out on one of the shows recently, but I'm convinced that because of all of these one-score wins, 11 of them, 0 losses in that vein, I'm going to put this out on the record. I think the Vikings are sitting on a mini blowout. I think that all of this script was written, that you have all of these just heart-stopping games, walk-off field goals that set franchise records, botched kneel-down snaps from Josh Allen. That's just the tip of the iceberg. All of the Vikings one-score wins, I think those were all practice for this game. And right now, I think most folks would be like, yeah, the Vikings will squeak one out because that's what they do. I foresee that this is the first time since week 1 that Minnesota will beat a team with relative ease. And I'm putting it out there, 30-13 Vikings. I think it's great for the Giants to get to the dance in Brian Dable's opening salvo. Good for them. But I really think that I'm trying to avoid the cynicism here. I think that the Vikings will finally put together one full game just to get us excited for round 2. In all likelihood, they go to the 49ers and get beat. Brock Purdy just keeps rolling. The Vikings or the 49ers defensive line just ransacks Cousins like they did 3 years ago at this time on the calendar. I think they'll get us excited with a complete game against the Giants, and then do some unsavory stuff in the divisional round. I think that's what I'm leaning toward. Maybe I'll talk myself into it with the rest of yous if they do pull off this 30-13 win, which I'm predicting. The last time the last time the Vikings and Giants played in the postseason was the 2000 NFC Championship. It involved a pastry, a donut. Minnesota lost 41-0, and I think it was one of the only games in my life that I turned off. I think, I know I was 17 years old, super excited. 98 championship was still really fresh, and you thought, maybe they've grown enough to know that they can beat these somewhat underwhelming 2000 Giants to get to the Super Bowl. No. That thing was toast before it even began, and that was the last time these two teams met in the postseason. So interestingly enough, for you, the fan, because there's no players or coaches associated with that team, this is a little chance at some vengeance to get the Giants back for the naughty shit they pulled off 22 years ago. And finally, we're going to talk about Giants and Vikings all this week. Josh Fry will be on tomorrow. I'm trying to get a couple other guests for maybe Thursday and Friday. But it's the tip of the cap to the Lions. It was incredible to watch them. You kind of felt like, when they were eliminated by the Seahawks, that any talking point about playing for pride was bullshit because their wind had to be taken out of their sails. But that just didn't happen. They played as if the postseason was on the line and then some, and did what the Vikings could not, and that was knock the Packers out of serious playoff contention. The Vikings, if they had won in Week 17, would have dwindled the Packers' postseason probability to like 2%. Of course, that didn't happen, and the Lions finished them off. Who'd have thunk it? So, they will get ready for, let's see, what do we got? 8 months of Lions chatter because the NFL media, that will be everybody's fashionable pick to make the postseason, maybe win the North. That's on the way. But yes, that is the opening to Vikings playoff week. We'll be back tomorrow with Josh Fry to go over a little bit about the Bears and then more of reaching the postseason for the first time in 3 years. Skol, baby.